thank you all for being here. Thank you all for greeting David. David, thank you. Please come and be with us all.
Good evening.
David, can you offer any insight about why Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, The Nation magazine, and Alexander Cockburn of The Progressive magazine, and Matthew Rothschild have not raised these many 9/11 questions?
No. Actually, I can say a little bit about it, and I actually did already in the first book. There's my long footnote in that book that I didn't mention Noam Chomsky's name, but I call it my Chomsky note. That there's this view that Chomsky has that a structural analysis is what we need, both of the ills of this nation and the world as a whole. And I completely agree with this. I've been reading Noam Chomsky for about 30 years now and agree with him on virtually everything except 9/11 and one other big thing. And he somehow believes there's some antithesis between structural thinking and believing that the government would do this kind of conspiracy against its own people. He believes conspiracy thinking is individualistic thinking, that you're thinking, oh, there are just a bunch of bad apples in there, and if we can just get rid of Bush and Cheney and a few other people and replace them with better people, then everything will be fine. But of course, I don't believe that, and I don't know many people in the 9/11 movement who believe it, but Chomsky believes we believe it, and that gives him a bias, I believe, against it. So I don't like to criticize Noam Chomsky because he is one of our great heroes, and nobody can be right about everything. But I do hope, like his good friends Richard Falk and Howard Zinn, that pretty soon the blindfold will come off.
Thank you. David, can you comment on how the official account of 9/11 has impacted the Islamic community in the United States or elsewhere?
This is one of the major reasons why I and why all of us should work very hard to expose this lie, because we have this tradition. You are innocent until proven guilty. But now Muslims around the world feel like they are guilty until they can prove themselves innocent. This is a horrible thing. It is a civilizational war. And of course, there had been a suggestion, very famously, somewhat before 9/11, that maybe the war, once the Cold War had wound down and we didn't have a global enemy again, maybe now the next stage would not be some particular state, but would be a civilizational war. And that's what 9/11 has brought us. In spite of all the denials that this was a war against Islam, a war against Muslims, it is. They know it, and they feel it. I tried to contribute to this by suggesting a book that would be produced that would be called 9/11 and American Empire, Christians, Jews, and Muslims Speak Out. And this book has been published now, and I would encourage you all to get it. It has 5 Christian contributors, 5 Jewish, and 5 Muslims, and it was co-edited by John Cobb and one of his former Jewish students, and then Kevin Barrett, the Muslim at Madison. So we've started trying to counteract that. But of course, one book can't do very much. It will take the Christian churches and the Jewish communities to come forward and announce and renounce this claim that somehow Islam is an inherently violent religion. This is said all the time now. And people say, well, I'm afraid to get on a plane. If I see somebody kneeling and praying, I think they may be a terrorist. This is one of the horrible effects of 9/11.
Thank you very much. Another question of another type. How many persons would it have taken to install demolition devices in 3 towers and have any of them blabbed?
Yeah, we don't know anything about this, and I don't, my focus is on why the official story cannot be true. I don't try to develop some alternative, complete theory as to what really happened. We can find out what happened easily enough. You schedule a real investigation. You give special prosecutors subpoena power. People will talk to save their own skins. They will not talk. We know this from investigations we've had just in the last year. People only talk when they have to do so to save their own skins. So it's no surprise that nobody's talked. They've been hired. Why would they talk? Confess, yes, I participated in mass murder. As to how many people it would take, well, it would depend on how long you devote it, when were they put in, who knows. We can find out those things easily enough if we have an investigation. But people cannot demand that in order to reject the official story, you've got to have an answer to all of those questions. You don't get the answers before the investigation. You have the investigation in order to get the answers.
Didn't bin Laden claim or admit responsibility for 9/11? Is bin Laden a CIA asset?
On the second part, certainly bin Laden was involved with the CIA for a long time. And so the official story, of course, is he got disgusted with America and turned against us and became our enemy. Many people suspect that's not what really happened. And there's considerable evidence for this, which I mentioned in the New Pearl Harbor, and then the second book, the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions. There was, bin Laden was in the American hospital in Dubai in July of 2001, being treated by an American doctor and visited by the local CIA agent. He was already our most wanted terrorist in the world. Doesn't something look strange with that? Also, when we said we wanted him dead or alive, and going after him in Afghanistan, time after time, when he and his Al-Qaeda followers could have been captured, they were not. Our troops would only block one road. They would go the other road, and so on. So there's lots of things to support that notion. One military officer even said, it'd be unfortunate if we caught bin Laden too early. With regard to the videotapes, the question is, of course, are they authentic? If your whole operation has been based on planted evidence, you're not going to suddenly stop planting evidence after the operation's over. You're going to keep doing it to keep reinforcing the story, even if the guy in the videotape doesn't look a whole lot like bin Laden that we've seen in undoubtedly authentic videotapes, even if the last videotape really doesn't look like him and he's suddenly got a very black beard. And I understand that it's not allowed to use black dye or anything like that on your beard when it starts turning gray. So You cannot take these things at face value. And don't you notice they just crop up every time at the most convenient time? Would bin Laden, if he was really America's arch enemy and just hated the Bush-Cheney administration, would he always provide a video just in time to help them with some political problem? I don't think so. So be a little suspicious of these videos. And remember, the FBI does not consider them hard evidence for bin Laden's responsibility. If the FBI doesn't think so, why should we?
One of the more difficult but necessary kinds of questions: do you think there is a parallel between the USA today and the development of Nazi Germany?
I'm afraid so. Now, that's considered one of those things you're not allowed to say in public. If you say there's some similarity between this administration and the Nazi regime, that there's some similarity between America today and Germany in the 1930s, that just proves you're absolutely out of your senses. You have no sense whatsoever. In fact, Ian Markham, in his critique of me, made this statement flat out and said, America under Bush is nothing like Germany under Hitler. It's an article of faith, but when you start looking at, Hitler didn't do these things overnight. These things were eroded over the years. Things have been eroding very quickly in this country in terms of rights, and frankly, unfortunately, in terms of our congressional representatives' concern about these rights, and whether they are really concerned to overturn these insane definitions of torture that allow anything up to organ failure not to count as torture. So we are violating the Geneva Accords. We are violating any human standards of decency. And there's no outrage from our representatives. With regard to the question of Christian faith, that was implicit in my lecture tonight. I didn't have time to develop it explicitly. I have in some other writings. That there was a movement in Germany known as the German Christians. And in fact, the majority of the Christians in Germany belong to that movement. There was a movement that protested against it, led by people such as Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Karl Barth. This was known as the Confessing Church. They were a relatively small group of Christians, but they're the ones we look back on now as the heroes. We look back in disgust at the German Christians who put their concern for German greatness above their concern for Christian faith. And they were blind. Their German faith blinded them. When people would tell them what was going on in the death camps, they would say, that is impossible. Our leaders are so cultured. They have been schooled in Bach and Beethoven. We have this great history. We are the most cultured nation on the face of the earth. Our leaders simply would not do such a thing. So they would not look at the evidence. It is a very strong parallel with America today. I'm afraid there is a parallel between American Christians and German Christians. So, yeah. So I hope when history books are written, all of us in this room who are Christians will be counted among the Confessing Church of America, the anti-imperialist branch of the Christian church.
A comment. I dropped out of Christianity at age 12 or 13 when my questions couldn't be answered. But there is some truth in every religion. I like but can't quite remember the adage about looking at the log in one's own eyes before criticizing others. This adage seems so appropriate for so many, whether the cause be patriotism or something else, and I don't see the rest of this. I believe that Americans must now confront their own evil so that others, and ourselves as well, will not continue to suffer from our, quote, goodness. If this does not happen, how can Americans think of themselves as anything more than simply fascists? You want to respond to the comment, Brother David?
I often think the most ignored words of Jesus. Now, this is a hard one because we ignore most of the words of Jesus. But the only words of Jesus we really take seriously are the ones he didn't say, like, all his denunciations of homosexuality. You know how many of those there are. But this statement, look at the log in your own eye before you denounce the splinter in your neighbor's eye. Christians criticizing Islam for being a violent religion. Do we know the history of the Crusades? Do we know what the Spanish Christians did in America? Do we know that we're talking about 100 million Native Americans slaughtered in North and South America? And North America had a smaller part in that, but our own share. And for us now to say, you Turks, you should acknowledge that there was genocide with the Armenians. Well, yes, they should. But have we ever publicly acknowledged the genocide of the Native Americans? No. Have we ever publicly acknowledged the depths of the evil of the slave trade and the enormous number of people who were killed just coming over in the slave ships? I mean, these are horrible, horrible, ugly stories in our past. And so let's not talk about Islam as an inherently violent religion before we acknowledge our own past, and make sure that it's not so-called Christian civilization that is the most violent portion of the world today. We've killed hundreds of thousands of people since 9/11 on the basis of a lie. And that's in the name of Christian civilization against Islamic civilization.
Where are the 9/11 truth movements headed, besides raising awareness and gaining edification? What is the ideal goal that the 9/11 movements see themselves trying to move towards?
Well, of course, the goal is to get the truth exposed. What's the most likely means by which this could occur? That's debatable. It's possible there will be hearings in the U.S. Congress. Not highly likely, it is possible. I've thought it's more possible that if one of our very friendly countries, such as Canada, or a very friendly continent, such as Western Europe, would hold, have very high-level, blue-level panels of very respected people, people of the caliber that if they made a judgment, the people in their country would say, well, that's probably right, the Walter Cronkite type of individuals. And have a week and let members of the 9/11 Truth movement come and present for, say, 2.5 days. Have defenders of the official theory come and present their defense. Then let the two groups debate back and forth, and then let the people, the jury, meet for a day or two and make a determination, and then announce their conclusion to the world. We don't have a single doubt that if that were done, what their decision would be. And if they did announce this to the press in Europe, it would be at least difficult for the American press to cover it up. They would probably have to report it. So that's a possible route. But mainly all we can do is keep raising awareness, increase the percentage of people who know, so that the next time there's a Zogby poll, it'll be up to, say, 45% who accept it. You know, it's already in the 30s, and we have different polls. They've been pretty high already. And the other new thing that has happened is the development of these new professional societies. At one time, people would dismiss, you know, when I got into the movement, people would say, well, you know, it's just a bunch of crazy kids on the internet, a bunch of conspiracy nuts. And then after I published my book, they said, well, it's a bunch of crazy conspiracy nuts on the internet and an aging theologian. And a lot of people will say this, well, you know, what does the theologian know about these things? Well, you know, I can read. And that's really all you need to know. You know, when you're talking about the towers, and could, you know, the early theory that they put on a NOVA program said that the fire melted the steel. Fire in an open situation like that cannot get above 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel does not begin to melt until 2800 degrees. This is junior high physics. You don't need to be a PhD in physics to be able to make a judgment about these things. So that was a bogus argument, but it's one that's quite often made. But now they can't make that, because now we have veterans for 9/11 Truth, with a growing number of former military officers. And now, as I mentioned, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. We have three former CIA analysts who have endorsed my book. You can go on a website. Probably if you're going to look at one website, go on Patriots Question 9/11. And there you get the largest number of well-known people who have, either well-known or well-credentialed people who have questioned the official story. Not all of them believe that it was an inside job. They may have just questioned and say, well, we need a better investigation. But I would say probably about 80% of them on there do, and you can tell by reading their statements what they say. And you'll see there is a remarkable number. I mean, we're talking about several hundred people, very well-known, very well-credentialed people. So the respectability of the movement has grown enormously in the last year. And so the results of us, those of us who worked in the early days, I was kind of a Johnny-come-lately. It was a year and a half after 9/11 before I woke up. And then my books did help some other people wake up, including the fellow, Richard Gage. He credits hearing me on the radio talking about the World Trade Center to his own waking up and then forming this society. So we have had remarkable degree of success given that and given the poll numbers, but it hasn't broken into the public sphere yet, and I've tried to give the basic reason for that tonight, that it is simply not allowed. It's not that there isn't overwhelming evidence for it, it's that it is not allowable in the public sphere to say these things. But maybe if we can get enough demand on Congress, maybe we can change that.